Greetings to everyone in Guyana. Good to be with you by this means of video recording. Sorry it's not live, but we have teachers that are traveling this month or who are busy in other areas. Royce Sarton, for example, is moving this month, and it's requiring most of his time to be able to complete that move, so he'll not be able to teach. And Brother Dave Layton is traveling. He is going to be out in Texas. He'll be able to take care of some of his classes, but not all of them. And we have others that are finding difficulty for the month of October. So some of the lessons will be recorded, and you'll still have access to them. I'm glad to be able to do this. I'm always glad to be able to visit with the folks in Guyana. Guyana is my second home. We spent 11 years there. Now we've spent another 3 to 5 years trying to do the video conferencing. And it's just always good for me to be able to be with those of you down in Guyana. I wish I was able to see you. But this recording doesn't allow us to do that. I want to call your attention in this session to the book of Luke. Luke chapter 12. If you have your Bibles, I hope you'll open those up to Luke chapter 12. This is a familiar story, but it makes a point that all of us need to be aware of. I'm going to begin reading in verse 13. Now this is Luke 12. Beginning at verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kind of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And there I'll store all my grain and all my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich toward God." Now we're all familiar with that story, and there's a lot of things that we could say about it. The main thing is this man knew that there were important things that he needed to do, and yet he was postponing those things. He was putting them off. He was counting on tomorrow, and many of us are doing the same thing. I don't know how long I have to be on this earth, but I know that today could be the day that I depart. I don't know. There are all kinds of illnesses. There's catastrophic events that take place. There's accidents. There's heart attacks. We don't know. And the Bible is very clear that we're not to count on tomorrow. James says, "What is your life? But a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away." He's talking about the brevity of life. We just don't know how long we're going to have. And it bothers me that, many of us, including myself, are making the same mistake that this rich man made. He was counting on tomorrow. I'll tear down all my old barns. I'll build new barns, bigger barns, and I'll store all my goods. And I'll say to myself, take life easy. You have a lot of things stored up for the future. Eat, drink, and be merry. But we don't know. A lot of us are eating and drinking and being merry, but we don't know how long we're going to have. I think about those folks, especially who are not Christians. And a lot of them are saying, I know I need to do something about that, and someday I'm going to become a Christian. And then there's those of us who are Christians that what we do is we are not living a life that we know is really pleasing to God. And what we're saying is, someday I'm going to get my life straightened out. Someday I'm going to become a faithful, committed child of God. But folks, we just don't know when someday is going to come. We know that we need to do this, but for some reason we're putting it off. And there's at least 4 things that are evident when we postpone doing important things. First of all, we recognize that there's a need to change. Now, if we didn't, we wouldn't be putting it off. We're saying, I'll do this, but I'll do it at a later date. I know I need to do something, but I'm not doing it. And then secondly, we really believe that this change is going to be unpleasant and distasteful. If we didn't think that, we'd be taking care of it right now. But somehow we think that this is going to be bad in some way, and it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be hard. And so we postpone it. We put it off. We'll do it later. We're not going to do it right now. And then for some reason, we think it's going to be easier to do this tomorrow than what it is today. But the truth of the matter is, the longer we put something off, the more difficult it becomes. It's easier today than it's ever going to be. We make that change and we make it today. The longer we postpone it, the harder it's going to be. And then the greatest fallacy of all, the greatest folly of all, is that we think for us there's going to be a tomorrow. And we just don't know. I wish I knew. I wish I knew for you. I wish I knew for myself. But folks, the truth of the matter is, we don't know. And if there's a change that needs to be made, we need to make it, and we need to make it now. When the invitation is issued, if we need to change, we need to do it, and we need to do it right now. Tomorrow, or postponing until tomorrow, has brought disaster for a lot of people. We know that. In the academic realm, for example, postponing until tomorrow, waiting until a later date, has brought disaster for a lot of people. Some of you that are listening to this are students, and you know what I'm talking about. Your teacher may say, okay, here's your assignment. You need to write this paper. You need to have these particular things available because we're going to have an exam. And you say to yourself, okay, I'll get started on that, but I'm not going to do it today. I'll do it tomorrow. And for many people, because they've put off until tomorrow these important things, they've failed a class. And they've had to repeat a class. I know a lot of people that's had to do that. There's some of your preachers down there in Guyana. When they were in the school of preaching, they knew what assignments they had. They knew what verses they needed to memorize. They knew what papers they needed to write. They knew what was going to be on their exam. But for some reason, they put off studying for it. They put off memorizing those passages. And then at the last minute, they're trying to cram in order to get all of that done. And the principle usually is, and the truth usually is, they didn't get it done. And they failed those classes. When I was a student at the Sunset School of Preaching out in Texas, our classmates, we would ask a lot of times, hey, have you started your memory work yet? And usually the answer would be, no, but I'm going to get on that tomorrow. Have you started writing that term paper yet? No, but I plan to do that tomorrow. Have you started studying for your exam? No, but I plan to do that tomorrow. And for many of them, tomorrow was disastrous. And a lot had to try to make up a lot of things at the last minute. Folks, what I'm trying to say is putting off important things can bring disaster. It also has brought disaster for people in the medical realm. I preached for about 6 years up in the Midwest near St. Louis, Missouri. And there was a young man in the congregation there by the name of Mike Zobrist. And Mike had a mole on his back. And his mother, when she would see that, would say to Mike, "Mike, you need to go to the doctor and let him check that mole that is on your back." And Mike would say, "Mom, I'm going to. I will. Not today, but someday I'm going to do that." Well, his mother would stay after him. "Mike, you got to go to the doctor. You got to get that taken care of." And Mike would say, "Mom, just get off my back. Leave me alone. I'm going to take care of it, but I'm not going to do it today." Well, later, Mike had a place to come up under his arm. And it became, very difficult even to move his arm. And finally, he decided he needed to go and get that taken care of. And I happened to be there the day that Mike was having his surgery. And I was sitting with his mother. And the doctor took Mike out, took him to the operating room. And in a little while, it wasn't real long, not as long as we had expected, the doctor came back. And you could tell by looking at him that the news he was fixing to give was not going to be good. And he looked at this mother and he said, "Mrs. Zobrist, there's not anything that we can do for Mike. When we open this up under his arm, I put my hands up into his chest cavities, and he is full of cancerous cells, and there's nothing that we can do." Well, you can imagine how heartbreaking this was to this mother. Her 16-year-old son is going to die of cancer, and she just broke down sobbing, which I can't blame her. And she consoled herself and controlled herself enough to ask the doctor, "Doctor, did this have anything to do with the mole that was on Mike's back?" And the doctor just kind of shook his head and said, "Ms. Zobrist, it had everything to do with that mole. Why didn't Mike come to see me sooner? We could have helped him." Can you imagine how heartbreaking that is? If only he had come sooner. If only he hadn't put it off, we would have been able to help him. Well, of course, that, devastated this mother. But it's typical. When things go wrong, we need to take care of it immediately. Our oldest son, when he was in high school, loved to play basketball. And I can remember him saying to me, "Dad, if I can just make the team, I'll be happy." And after he made the team, it was, "Dad, if I can just be a starter and play, I'm going to be thrilled." Well, he became a starter. And we would go to the games and watch, and he was thrilled to be playing basketball on the high school team. Well, one night they were in a game, and when a player indicated that he needed to come out of the game, he would raise his hand with a clenched fist. And that said to the coach, "Coach, take me out." Well, Keith, our oldest son, was playing, and all of a sudden I saw him raise his hand like this, "Coach, take me out." Well, first of all, I couldn't believe it, because he wanted to play so bad I couldn't imagine that he wanted to come out of the game. He went over and sat on the bench. He wasn't there maybe 2 minutes till he went back in. Well, he wasn't in but about a half a minute that up went his fist again. He came out and sat on the bench. Well, as soon as the game was over, I went to Keith and said, "Keith, what in the world's wrong? Why did you come out of the game? He said, Dad, I think I've got the flu. He said, I am so sick. I'm sick all over, and I just believe I've got the flu. I said, all right, you need to get home as soon as the game is over with, and you need to go to bed. He said, well, Dad, I promised Mr. Johann, this was one of the members of the church there, he said, I promised him I'd help him move some furniture. I said, well, are you sure you need to do that? You look pretty ill to me. He said, well, I'll be home just as soon as I get finished. Well, I heard him come dragging in about 10:30, 11 o'clock. And I went and asked him, Keith, are you doing all right? He said, Dad, I'm really sick. I'm sick. Well, his bedroom was downstairs, and the bathroom was upstairs. Well, during the night, I would hear him coming up the steps, going to the bathroom, and vomiting. I knew he was sick, and I'd go in and check on him. Well, after a while, I didn't hear him running up and down the steps anymore. So I was really concerned, and I went in to check on him, and there he was on the couch. He got closer to the bathroom. Well, when morning came, he was still on the couch, and I walked by him, and I said, Keith, how you doing? He said, Dad, I am really, really sick. I need to go to the doctor. I said, okay, I'll have your mother call and make an appointment. I had a previous appointment to go to one of the local hospitals and fulfill a request from a man who was terminally ill that wanted to be baptized. So I was going over there, and I said, you get the appointment, and you go on to it, and I'll check on you as soon as I get back. Well, we were going to baptize the man in the whirlpool at the hospital. When I got over there, they said, well, it's occupied until afternoon, so you'll have to come back afternoon. So I said, okay, and I went back home. And when I got home, there was Keith still on the couch, and he said, Dad, I am really, really sick. Well, I said, your mother's made you an appointment. When is it? He said, 4 o'clock this afternoon. Well, I don't take care of those things in our family. That's what my wife takes care of. But for some reason, I went to the telephone and I called the doctor's office. And when the nurse answered, I said, my son needs to get in to see you, and he needs to get in now. And she said, Mr. Cantrell, he has an appointment at 4 o'clock. I said, ma'am, what you don't understand is he's sick now, not at 4 o'clock this afternoon. And he needs to see the doctor, and he needs to see him now. Well, apparently she was convinced. And she said, well, bring him in and come to the back door, and we'll take him straight into the examining room. Well, but this time I had to go back to the hospital. And so I left to go to the hospital one way. They left to go to the doctor's office another way. So when I finally got back home, my youngest son met me running down the driveway saying, Dad, you've got to get to the hospital, and you've got to get there right now. I said, why? They said, because they're operating on Keith. And I said, you don't operate on the flu. What do you mean they're operating on Keith? He said, Dad, I don't know, but you need to get there right now. Well, I just turned the car around, headed to the hospital in the other direction. And when I got there, I met them in the hallway as they were wheeling him to the operating room. And all I had time to say and ask the doctor is, what is going on? What are you doing? And the doctor, as he didn't even stop, he said, this boy's appendix has ruptured, and we've got to get him into surgery right now. Well, they took him to surgery. They had to take out his appendix. They had to drain his stomach cavities because of all this poison that was in it. Well, the doctor finally came in after a while, and I had an opportunity to ask him. I said, what if we had waited till 4 o'clock this afternoon for you to see him? And the doctor looked at me kind of puzzled and said, Mr. Cantrell, you wouldn't have needed me. You would have needed an undertaker. Well, boy, that'll get your attention. How close we came to losing our oldest son, simply because had we waited, it would have been too late. That's the danger of putting things off. It's cost people in the academic realm. It's cost people in the medical realm. But it's also cost people in the military realm. In America's history in 1776, we were in the process of fighting for our independence against the British. And there was an event that took place during that Revolutionary War that will get your attention. General George Washington, who was our first president, was marching on the British at Trenton, New Jersey. It was a surprise attack. He was crossing the Delaware River, but he was observed doing so by a Troy farmer. This was the city of Troy. He was marching on Trenton, New Jersey, but a farmer from the city of Troy saw his advance. Well, he immediately went to General Rawls, who was the commander of the British troops in Trenton, New Jersey. And he told the sentry there, he said, I need to see General Rawls. And the sentry said, I'm sorry, you can't do that. He's in a very high-level meeting right now, and it's impossible for you to see him. Well, this farmer said, you don't understand. This is very important. I need to see him. He said, well, you can write him a note, and I'll get the note to him. So the farmer writes on a piece of paper, Washington attacking Trenton, New Jersey. And he gave it to this sentry, the guard. And the guard goes in and interrupts this high-level meeting that General Rawls was in, which was a poker game. And he didn't want to be disturbed. And the sentry gave him the note. Well, General Rawls took the note and stuck it in his pocket. This took place on December the 25th, 1776. General Rawls didn't read that note until December the 26th, 1776. And when he read it, he was a prisoner of war of the American Revolutionary Army. You see, he had an advantage, but he didn't pursue it. He didn't take advantage of what he had. And as a result, it cost him a victory. And as a result of that victory, it cost him the independence of the United States of America. Now, we're kind of happy about that, but still, we learn a valuable lesson that when things are important, you need to take care of them. Now, there's a story similar to that in the Bible in 2 Samuel chapters 15 through 18. And you're familiar with this story as well. This was when Absalom was usurping the throne of his father David. And he had gathered an army, went into the city of Jerusalem, and literally ran David out. David had to run for his life. And now Absalom was sitting on his father's throne. And he needed to know what to do. So he called in a couple of fellas to get their advice as to what to do. The first one was a fellow by the name of Ahithophel. Ahithophel said, if you'll give me 12,000 troops, I'll pursue David and I'll kill him. Well, the other fellow that he asked was a fellow by the name of Hushai. Hushai secretly was aligned with David. So when he was asked by Absalom what he thought he ought to do, he said, you need to wait. You need to wait. You know David is like a wounded bear. And if you pursue him right now, he's going to fight like that wounded bear, and he's going to prevail. Wait until your troops have rested, and then you pursue David. Well, that's the advice that Absalom took. And what was unknown to Absalom is during this lull, while he was waiting, David was able to gather his mighty men and his army from all over Israel. That when Absalom finally did attack, David had been strengthened, and he prevailed in the battle. And eventually, Absalom lost his life. That's what happens when we put off doing important things. Now, this is a two-part lesson. And right now, what we have done is just talk about the dangers of postponing things. And when we get together the next time, we're going to talk about, people that have literally lost their eternal souls because they've postponed. And we're going to ask the question, what is tomorrow going to bring for you? So I hope you'll be present for this next lesson, and I hope you'll open your minds and open your hearts as to what you need to do. It's been good to be with you tonight. You might want to take the time to pursue some questions and answers about the lesson tonight. But we'll get together next time, and we'll talk about these things that accompany us postponing important things. As always, have a safe journey home. You're always in my thoughts. You're always on my heart. I'm always thinking about you. Be careful. Have a safe journey. I love you. I hope that you continue to grow in your faith.